Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our brand new series on PlayStation 1 based arcade hardware and what games they played in arcades. And it wasn't just a home console, the PlayStation 1 had so many different variations in the arcade, it's really hard to keep track of, from the common like a Capcom ZN series to the rare like the Konami GQ Crypt Killer board. And because it's Video Game Esoteric, we're going to be showing you guys just some of the weird stuff. Before we get too far involved though, if you need a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But let's get right into it with the Konami GQ system, and this is a very weird board for a very specific reason. Konami designed this entire board, and they put one and only one game on it, and that is Crypt Killer. Now don't get me wrong, I love that game, but it's a lot of money to spend just to release a single game. You will see both the Sony CPU and GPU are on board here, and they run at the exact same clock speeds as a standard PlayStation 1. The only difference in this board is that it has double the amount of video RAM. So compared to the PlayStation 1 original, this is going to have better lighting and shadow because they were able to use that video RAM to a little bit more effect. But you'll see here the other weird thing is, where the PlayStation 1 ran on optical discs, the Crypt Killer board runs on a SCSI hard drive, and these things absolutely love to die. But the game itself is spectacular. I love this, and if you can't tell already, I am capturing this via MAME, because Crypt Killer does not like to capture with my setup. Works awesome on my PVM with my original guns, but if I try to capture it, I just keep losing sync. So it's a little bit of a pain in the butt board to work with, so if you're looking for one, just be advised with that. But a close-up here as well, I could use a little dust on this one. It is just a standard PlayStation 1 pushed out into this large PCB, and it is not a small PCB at all. And interestingly, it even has some NCR branded chips on them, and that is National Cash Register. A cash register company had chips on a Konami arcade board based on the PlayStation 1. The unfortunate part of these boards is 99 out of 100 times they're going to be dead, and that's because that SCSI hard drive has died because it spins up. But I did show in a previous video almost 2 years ago now how you can convert these boards to run on a SCSI to SD adapter. So this board boots based on a solid state micro SD card that is emulating the SCSI protocol and sending the data for the game directly into the arcade board, which is just spectacular. It's a fun board. I love it. Would I advise you buy one? Probably not. Just play Crypt Killer on PlayStation 1. But let's move on to a board that I really do advise you buy if you're into this sort of thing, and that is the Taito G-Net board. Now Taito didn't just use PlayStation 1 hardware for the G-Net, they had other boards as well based on that hardware, but I just love the G-Net and some of the quirkier games we get on it, as well as the media that these games came on. Because first, with the GQ hardware, we had hard drives. With G-Net, we have PCMCIA memory cards. I know they're called G cards from Taito, but it is just basically the exact same technology, just with a nice Taito sticker on top. But it's a fun little design. They pack the entire game onto this card as solid state media, but it does in fact load when you first turn on the board. It's going to load into RAM, and then from there it doesn't really do much. So it's not instantaneous. It's not like putting a Neo Geo AES cartridge into a machine. It does take a bit of time, but once you're playing, you will never notice. And comparing a G card to another media, it's just so tiny and so much fun. But it's got a ton of games on it as well, something like Super Puzzle Bobble here. It is not the same game that you know on PlayStation 2. This is a different version of the game. They're not identical, and this is unported. It's never come home. And if you know the channel, you know I love puzzle arcade games, and Puzzle Bobble is definitely one that I love to spend a lot of time with, so it is just great to have it in my collection. Another great game that no one really talks about is Night Raid. It is a shmup, and it's got a lot of different weird and interesting mechanics to it. It is another game that I have in my collection that I take out from time to time and play, and I have such a good time. And the G-Net hardware has a lot of great games. Something like Chaos Heat, it is basically like an action-oriented third-person Resident Evil style game for the platform, and again, it never got any sort of home port, so it's just so much fun to have this sort of stuff in my collection. And you can make other games run on it as well, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But back to the physical media, it's just fun to slot these cards in and out of that loader. It's just a thing that I always enjoy the mechanical nature of the G-Net, but I will say the board is a little bit of a mess and it feels like it's kind of put together with spare parts they had lying around. But the great part is it is moddable. We have a chip socket here, and what you can do is burn a modded BIOS and flash it to the BIOS chip internally. It's not the type of thing that overrides the chip. You can upgrade it this way, and then you can play other games on this board that were never released on the G-Net. You can have something like G-Darius version 2 in your collection running on original arcade hardware for much cheaper than if you actually bought a PCB for this game, because they are not giving them away, but it is 100% worth modding your board. And if you want to see a mod on this, leave me a comment down below and maybe I'll do it in the future. But again, this board just seems like an amalgamation of things Taito had around. You have the G-Net motherboard, which is basically just interfacing with the Sony PlayStation 1 motherboard below, and this does run at higher speeds than a base PlayStation 1, and you have that disk drive up top. But the funniest part is this backup PCB is hilarious. It doesn't use a battery. It uses 3 giant capacitors that are zip tied in place, and when this board is running, those capacitors charge up and act as a battery. I have never seen this before. If you know of it, leave me a comment down below, but it's just a weird sort of situation. But short of all the weirdness, it is just a standard JAMA PCB. You've got some different connectors for speakers, for trackballs, analog controls, things such as that, and you have this beefy heatsink as well. But if you just take a look at this board, half of it is hanging off the other end. It is just hilarious how wonky this thing truly is. And when you think about it, it's just such a fun delivery method. This card versus that Konami hard drive. Everything was just so weird on PlayStation 1 arcade hardware. Konami would use a hard drive for one game, but then they actually got into the CF card business when they went to Konami Viper, but it's just so much fun to look at all the media. Now let's get into something really esoteric, the Konami GV, or as it's also known, the Baby Phoenix. This is the GV21JA and it is a hyper athlete board. But this has got to be the most overbuilt arcade PCB I have ever seen. This metal is incredibly thick. It's like 1/8 of an inch of pure aluminum. You could drop a bowling ball on this and I think it would hold up. Around the corner into this fortress of a PCB, you have connectors for the 4th player, the 3rd player, and a connector that can sometimes be used for additional games like Simpsons Bowling. And if we take a look around the front, we just have a 4-pin header for audio, and then we have a standard JAMA edge as well, so just another JAMA board. But again, let's get into this tank right here. I'm not going to show you the motherboard for 2 specific reasons. One being, I'll show you in a second, and 2 being, this is just basically a PlayStation 1. It has a SCSI CD-ROM drive versus an internally built CD-ROM drive for the actual PlayStation, but it doesn't really change anything whatsoever off the base hardware other than the fact that it's outputting over a JAMA edge versus having inputs in the front for the controllers and out for the video and back like a standard PlayStation 1. But this is as close to a real PlayStation 1 as you get in arcades. It is using the same style media in the same way, it's just changing things over to work in an arcade cabinet with JAMA versus a standard PlayStation 1 where you just plug your controller in. But it's using the same type of discs, it's just doing it in a completely different way, and you're not going to see many people talk about the Konami GV or Baby Phoenix whatsoever, and that's because it's not that interesting of a platform. I much prefer the G-Net over this. So if we take a look in the back, it's got the most comically short SCSI cable I've ever seen, and then it just taps the stereo input off of the CD-ROM drive and injects it into the board, and then it powers everything with a 4-pin Molex connector. It's like half PC, half PlayStation 1 in theory, but unfortunately these things love to stop working because it's constantly spinning that disk up and it will burn those drives out. I was going to dig in a little bit more even though it's not that interesting, but they use the weirdest size security bit here. I cannot find a single bit in my comprehensive collection of bits that'll actually open this damn thing up, so you'll just have to understand. It looks like a PlayStation 1 inside, it just happens to have a JAMA edge. But when I mean this is weird hardware, I mean it. There's really not a ton on it. I got this thing for like $40 and I just wanted to buy it for the curiosity, and honestly Hyper Athlete is a relatively fun game as well, so you really can't go wrong for 40 bucks there. But it's got a decent library on it and you can find them cheap, and it is really fun just to kind of play around with this hardware. And trust me when I say it's built like a tank, it is the beefiest arcade board I have in my collection, I think. But yeah, that is just a sampling of the PlayStation 1 based arcade hardware. We got a G-Net, we got a Baby Phoenix, and we got a GQ board. There are so many other boards that use the PlayStation 1. I just wanted to show you guys some of the rarer stuff before we get into a series where we have 10 games all playing on PlayStation 1 arcade hardware. But short of that, leave me a comment down below. Do you own PlayStation 1 arcade hardware? Are you interested in getting into it, or is just watching me talk about all this weirdness good enough for you? I'll be back next Tuesday with some PlayStation 1 based arcade goodness, and I'll have videos for the week, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.